Bernard Herrmann's walking distance is full of different orchestration and composition techniques. Last week we focused on some of those orchestration techniques, such as reorchestration. This week we are looking at the composition. However, just like with the orchestration, we'll have to be selective. Therefore, I've selected two short cues to look at in their entirety. The introduction, number 1 in the soundtrack, I believe, and cue number 8 called the merry-go-round. We'll also look at a third cue, which will be an extract of that cue, and that was the third cue as well in the actual track Memories. I'll be discussing a plethora of techniques that Herrmann uses. The main two are melodic sequences, which Herrmann uses as a device for extending and developing ideas, and tension or suspense, of which Herrmann is masterful in creating and controlling. Non-sarcastically, the introduction is a great place to start, as it displays a range of techniques that establish the musical language of the episode. These are melodic sequences, extended triadic harmonies, and non-resolving tension tones. It also has a Lydian suspension, however I'm going to leave that suspension out so I can leave you in suspense. So I can focus on the others here, the other techniques, as there's a more extensive demonstration of the use of Lydian in a later cue, the third cue, which we'll come on to and focus on there. A melodic sequence is the repetition of a melodic cell or motif at a higher or lower pitch. In musical terminology, the movement of the cell up or down in pitch is known as a transposition. The transposition may be a straight one where both the contour and intervals between notes are identical, but the pitches are changed. Or it could be that only the contour remains the same and the intervals are changed slightly. Typically, if the composer uses the latter, where the intervals are changed, it's to work with the underlying harmony or larger tonal area. In the case of Herrmann, he uses straight transpositions in this cue and several wider parts of the score. For instance, in the introduction, each cell of the opening 4-bar melodic sequence preserves its intervallic content. Each one rises a semitone from its starting pitch before falling back down to the starting pitch on beat 3. It then falls a major third from beat 3 to beat 4. It's therefore a straight transposition between each of the bars because each bar follows that same intervallic sequence, if you like. On a larger scale, the melodic sequence splits into two parts. Between bars 1 and 2 and 3 and bars 3 and 4, each melodic cell of the sequence falls by a minor second. However, between bars 2 and 3, it falls a minor third. Throughout the different cues, there is an emphasis on minor seconds and either major or minor thirds in the melody and harmony. Herrmann regularly uses one chord per bar in many of his cues and throughout the introduction cue. He also frequently extends his triads using minor, major, dominant and diminished seventh combinations. In this cue he predominantly uses dominant seventh structures, which is significant as it is a harmonically unstable chord that wants, but Herrmann does not allow, to resolve. More ambiguous or contextually dependent as opposed to dissonant, the dominant seventh chord is unstable on account of its tritone. Like the repulsion of two magnets, the two tones that make up a tritone interval typically want to resolve outwards or inwards in a kind of contrary motion to the following chord, which usually results in a kind of dominant relationship between the chord that had the tritone and the next following one. Between bar 6 and 7, the introduction cue comes to a close with a trademark supernatural or surreal or I guess more outer-worldly combinations of chords, often referred to or labelled as a capital M6, capital M, where the two capital M's mean there's a pair of major chords that are moved between each other and they have a root position that is 6 semitones apart or an augmented fourth. By no means deathly or dangerous due to the major qualities, the B-flat 7 to E7 tells us that something not quite right is going to happen, even if it takes time for the protagonist, Martin Sloan, and us, the audience, to realise it. In addition to the rich, unsettled harmony, Herrmann adds to this feeling by having the melodic sequence that we have discussed sit dissonantly against much of the harmony. If we examine the opening 4 bars, for instance, very few notes are chord tones. Furthermore, most of the tones resolve to tension notes such as the 7th. Similar to the next cue in the article, number 8, the merry-go-round, the shape of the melodic cell and lack of resting points where the melody settles on notes of the harmony is disorienting. It is like we are spinning or unable to catch our breath. Herrmann's harmony is incredibly considerate, as we've touched upon. While there is a great deal of tension in the melody, harmonic structure and the progression, his emphasis on major chords as opposed to minor ones sets a tone that is not one, as I've said, of danger or death. If the tonality had been minor, or placed emphasis on minor modality, the feeling could have been more dreadful. Set in the mood, this combination of uplifting major tonality with unstable harmonies exudes a depth of meaning that allows us to relax but also be on guard or on lookout for something that, as I've said, is not quite right. There are so many points where Herrmann uses sequential structures that I've had to be selective. Picking just a few that I felt invited exploration of additional concepts, the second example, number 8, the merry-go-round, is compelling in my opinion, as it also uses some techniques of melodic development. To introduce some of these concepts, as they are useful to understand as composers, I will discuss them here. Similar to the introduction, the piece opens with a melodic sequence. The cells themselves are characterised by a falling 4-note chromatic cell. Presented in a high register on the first violins, each cell is repeated an octave lower in the second violins. The sequential repetition of this pattern occurs in a chromatic stepwise manner too. In other words, every 2 bars the next figure starts a minor second lower than the first. Therefore, strictly speaking, the sequence follows a pattern of down an octave followed by upper major 7th. Similarly, in the previous examples featuring the introduction cue, we can also see Herrmann uses a great deal of tension again, using the devices we have discussed, unsettling harmonic structures and non-resolving melody tones. For example, as well as being chromatic, as we've discussed, the opening cells often start from chord extensions. In the first bar, for example, it is a major 9th falling to a highly dissonant minor 9th. The melody therefore imposes tension notes that are usually sharply dissonant. In other words, they're like a semitone apart, so a minor 2nd or a compound minor 2nd, as we've said, the minor 9th, or a major 7th and things like that. In extension to the sequences, Herrmann also deploys some melodic development within this cue, along with a gradual accelerando instruction at the beginning of the piece. The melodic development creates a feeling of speeding up through diminution and spiralling out of control where he alters the cues, which we'll go into next. Fragmentation is the process of extracting a portion of a melodic idea or motif and focusing on it as an idea in its own right. Herrmann uses fragmentation in 2 places in this cue and is performed on what we will call the falling idea. At the end of the cue, the fragmented cell uses a minor 2nd but is rhythmically altered. Changed from crotchets to a dotted rhythm, it is a declamatory ending to the cue. In bar 8 and 9, the fragmentation serves to transition our pitch material from the persistent falling chromatic idea. Imposing a major 2nd, it leads us into a restatement of the falling idea. However, while the contour remains, the intervals are a mixture of major 2nds and minor 2nds, I suppose more diatonic in structure rather than wholly chromatic. The diatonic falling idea acts as a bridge into the spiralling idea at bar 14. Mixing diatonic intervals, the contour is suddenly altered, creating the most dramatic change in the cue, which is exacerbated by the rhythmic diminution of what we've labelled the spiralling idea in bar 16. Diminution is the process of decreasing a note's rhythmic value. In a straight, consistent rhythmic transposition, the pitches remain the same, but the note values turn from crotchets to quavers. As you're aware, I try to focus on the music composition to ensure clarity in these articles. However, I think it is important to briefly point out that there are some parallels with the narrative and visuals at this point. After all, this score was composed for TV. Herrmann will have been thinking about this in composition as opposed to processes of fragmentation and diminution, which are valuable to us in analysis in figuring out how Herrmann uses compositional techniques to convey ideas. The merry-go-round cue comes at an integral point in the narrative, integral for Martin Sloane, the protagonist, and us, the audience. The revelation that we have not only travelled into a nearby village, Sloane's childhood hometown, but also back in time is mind-bending. Sloane sees himself as a child and his parents, who are approximately the same age as him in this instance. Could you imagine anything more insane, experiencing anything more insane? Obviously a maddening experience, Sloane tries to pursue his childhood self and also converse with his parents to try and persuade them of who he is. At this point the narrative reveals an injury Sloane sustains on a merry-go-round as a child, only it was caused by Sloane scaring and chasing himself, leading him to fall from the merry-go-round. Herrmann's music therefore replicates this falling, the falling from the merry-go-round and falling into the madness of the situation with his chromatic falling idea. Adapting the initial idea, the spiralling idea replicates the circular motion of the merry-go-round and the surreal spinning shift that we feel in time and events. The choices may not have been conscious, so we can only speculate as to whether this was Herrmann's thinking. However, it does seem plausible in post-rationalisation. In the opening section of the longer third cue, Memories, Herrmann uses two strings of melodic sequences. At the very opening, the first sequence uses an idea doubled at the third, an octave. The sequence transposes the idea downward by a major third and then by a perfect fourth. The last iteration of the cell is not a straight transposition but is rhythmically the same and thus easy to see the link between the two cells. The second sequence occurs in the solo viola, starting in bar 8. It uses a shorter cell, but there are more iterations of the idea. After going up by a minor second, it then falls successively by a major third, another major third, and a major second. The last iteration of the cell is fragmented and echoed by the cello. The descending quality of the sequences has a different effect in this cue. Rather than falling into madness, possibly because the phrases are more drawn out and the tempo steadier, could also be to do with the intervallic relationships between the sequences and the intervals within the cells. They're not chromatic in this instance. The feeling is one of melancholy instead. Many of the harmonic tensions, some of which Herrmann does resolve, and some of which he does leave hanging, add nostalgia and sentimentality to this larger feeling of melancholy too. Herrmann, to invoke feelings of nostalgia and past memories, uses Lydian tension notes. In bar 2 and 5, for instance, the melody either falls or rises to a melodic note that is the sharp fourth of the underlying scale, or could be seen as sharp 11 within context of the chord, the harmony. E natural in bar 2 and 5, for instance, is the raised fourth of the underlying B flat, which would have been obviously an E flat in a standard major scale of B flat. Likewise, in bar 4, F major ordinarily would have had a B flat, however the melody falls to a B natural being the raised fourth again, that is present in what would be the Lydian mode of F. Using an appoggiatura style melodic tension in the later sequence with the solo viola, Herrmann conjures the same effects, extending them across the cue. He also includes other tension tones such as the major seventh, the F sharp in bar 10. I think the broader takeaway from this extract is that mixing up tension and resolution adds to the overall complexity of the music. While simply deploying a lot of tension can create intensity and suspense, Herrmann resolves some here and leaves others to stay with us. The result therefore is more one of yearning, in this case yearning for simpler times that we can relive only in memory. Thinking about the larger scale form of a score can easily be overlooked, yet the power wielded by media composers in determining what information, however precise or ambiguous, to reveal or even extend is immeasurable. In this article we have looked at melodic sequences as an economical means of extending and developing ideas, along with two types of tension that can create feelings of suspense or emotion. One type is that which frequently accompanies harmonic instability and dissonance and is used to create suspense. The other, using Lydian, is used to evoke emotion. As I said in the previous video on orchestration, time is of the essence. We all want to put our best foot forward, but doing so requires we manage our time effectively as composers. Time management is one answer to that. However, that's only any good if you can do what you need to do in the time that you allot to a task. Crafty skills such as reorchestration, which we looked at in the previous article, or reliable, efficient means of extending our ideas that we've seen in this video, means you can turn a little into a lot. Turning a little into a lot makes allotted time productive,